Hey, Mike with Nerd Problems Gaming here, the channel where we go through the good and bad of everything nerdy to make sure you spend your time on the best of the best. In today's video, I'll be doing a review and how to play video on the card game Regicide, so let's get into it. Alright guys, well let's jump into how you play the game so you have a better understanding on how the game works, and then we'll jump into my review from there. Alright, now that we got the game out, how does it all work? Well, Regicide is a cooperative game where players work together to defeat 12 powerful enemies. So players will work together to attack the enemy, and once enough damage has been done, the enemies will be defeated, and the players win once the last king is defeated. But each time you attack, you also get attacked back and have to defend against incoming damage from enemies. So in order to do this, and defend against incoming attacks, you need to discard enough cards to add up to the total or more than what the enemy has damaged you for. And if you can't discard enough cards, you die and everyone loses. So the startup of the game is the same no matter how many players are actually playing. So you want to separate out all the jacks, queens, and kings and jester cards from the deck. Once you've done that, you'll start with the kings and you'll shuffle them together, place them at the bottom, shuffle all the queens, place them on top of the kings, and then shuffle all the jacks and place them on top of the queens. This is what forms your castle deck. At this point, you'll flip the top card up so you have the jack showing, and this becomes the current enemy to start the game. Now at this point, you're going to shuffle all the rest of the cards together, but again, this also depends on how many players are playing. So if you're playing solo mode, you actually leave the jester cards out of the game, as well as a two-player game, you leave them out of the game as well. In a one-player game, you'll be able to use them in a different fashion, and in a two-player game, they just aren't included. In a three-player game, you'll shuffle in one jester card into the deck. In a four-player game, you'll shuffle them both into the deck. So let's say in this play example, we're playing a three-player game, so we're going to shuffle in one jester card into the deck. At this point, just shuffle the deck together a few times, and then you're going to deal out starting cards to the players. So as you can see by this chart, this breaks down the number of players, the number of jesters included, as well as the maximum hand size depending on how many players are playing. Again, we're playing a three-player version, so in this case, the maximum hand size is 6 cards, and so we'll deal out 6 cards to each player to start the game. At this point, the rest of the deck will form the tavern deck, and this is where cards are dealt and drawn from for the rest of the game. And when you discard cards, you'll just simply create a pile right next to the tavern deck here. The player to have most recently committed regicide goes first, or you can just randomly choose. Alright, so how the game works is that each turn consists of 4 steps. So step 1 is that you can either play a card or yield. So playing a card from your hand simply consists of playing a card from your hand and then dealing the equivalent damage listed on the card. So for example, let's say I did 4 of hearts here. This means I would do 4 damage to the jack. Now, this side of the card lists how much attack each jack does and how much health each jack has, and accordingly with the queen and king. So you can leave that out as a reference as well. But this side has the turn order on the card, which can be helpful as well. So again, in this case, I would do 4 damage, and then step 2 is you activate the suit's power. So each suit has its own unique power associated with it. So hearts will heal cards from the discard. So if you have a discard pile, you will shuffle the discard pile and then put however many cards that are healed on the bottom of the tavern deck. If you have a diamond, you're going to draw that many cards from the deck. And so how that works is you would draw the card first, and then it will go in clockwise order among the other players until all the cards have been dealt out. You can't have more cards than your starting hand though. So for example, if you had 4, you would do 1, 2, 3, 4 throughout players, again only up to the maximum hand size though. Clubs do double damage, so for example if I played a 5, it would be a 10 because of double damage. Spades will reduce an enemy's attack, so for example if I were to play a 6, it would do 6 damage, and then step 2 would activate the power, and so then you would know that when it's time for the jack to attack, it would be 10 minus 6, so it would only do 4 damage instead of 10. So again, the turn order goes you play your card or you yield. Yield just means that you decide not to attack, and then you'll skip to step 4 where the enemy tries to damage you. So again, after step 1 that you've played a card, you activate the suit power. You'll then deal damage to the enemy. You'll see if you killed them or not. If you didn't, you're going to suffer damage from the enemy. So again, in this case, the jack would do 10 damage, but I have the minus 6 from the spade, so he's only going to do 4 damage. And so I would have to go to the player that was attacking and look at their hand and see what card I might be able to discard, and it would need to add up to a total of 4 damage or more. So I can use multiple cards to do this, or a card that's more than that. So for example, I have a 4, so I could discard a 4, but again, I could discard a 6 as well if I needed to. Or if I had cards that added up to 4, I could do that as well. At this point, you'll move on to the next player, and then they will have a turn to follow the same process. So let's say, for example, this player played a 2, but since it's a club, it would normally double and be worth 4. However, one thing to note is that whatever the enemy's suit is, they actually nullify that power. So in this case, the club power would not work against this enemy. So instead of being 4, it's still only worth 2. Another thing to note is that you can also play pairs of cards, triples of cards, or even 4 of a kind as well. However, the total needs to be under 10. So for example, I could play 2 5s at the same time. And what's cool with this, if you play a combination like this, so it would be 5 plus 5 is 10, and then you would also activate both card effects. So let's say this wasn't a club here, and it was a heart. So neither of these effects would be nullified. So I would do 10 damage times 2, so 20 damage, plus I would get 5, 10, I would be able to draw 10 cards as well because it activates both powers. Now, one thing that's cool is that if you defeat an enemy with their exact health amount, so in this case we would, 5, 10, doubled is 20, jacks have 20 health. If you kill an enemy in that fashion, they actually go on top of the deck now and become a card that you can draw later on in the game. And so once that enemy is defeated, those cards will be discarded. You'll flip up the next enemy, and the player that just defeated that enemy will start over again, taking their first turn against this new enemy. Another thing to note is that if you get a Jester card, how this works is the player would play that from their hand, and it actually will now nullify the enemy's ability to block the special power of their suit type. So normally this Jack of Spades would block the Spade's power. However, if I would have played a Jester card first, I could now use Spade cards to reduce this enemy's attack power. Something also to note that's a little bit different when you play a Jester card, the player that played it doesn't necessarily go right away again. All players discuss and decide who will go next. Another thing to note too is that you're not technically allowed to tell other players what cards you have in your hand. So all of your cards from each player would be hidden normally, but you could say something like, I don't want to go next, or I think it might be better if someone else goes next, if, for example, you didn't have a card that you thought was very good to use against that enemy. But if you are going to play, you can play more casually and discuss if you want, but the more hardcore strict rules is that you don't communicate what cards you have when you play. One other combination to note as well is with aces and animal companions. So these can actually be added to an attack, similar to when a card pairs, and then you can activate both powers and you add the ace to the total as well. So in this case, let's say we did a 6 of hearts and an ace of clubs. It would be 1 plus 6 for 7, and then I would activate both powers. So I'd do a total of 14 damage. 6 plus 1 is 7 times 2 is 14. So I'd do 14 damage, and then I would activate 1 plus 6 for 7 hearts of healing. You can also do multiple combinations of animals or aces to stack even more damage and abilities. Also note that when you have jacks, queens, or kings in your own hand, they are worth the respective attack amount on both attacking and defense. So jacks are worth 10, queens are worth 15, and kings are worth 20. So they can either do 10, 15, or 20 damage, or block 10, 15, or 20 damage coming from enemies. The suit powers also activate according to what is on the specific enemy card. There is a solo mode as well, which is explained further in the rule book, so check that out if you have questions, or feel free to drop a comment below if you have other questions on how to play the game. But now that you have a better idea on how the game works, let's jump into my review. Well, now that you guys have a better understanding of how the game works, how do I feel about it? Well, the game itself is pretty simple and easy to learn. Really only takes a few minutes to get the hang of it. And the game itself can be pretty quick as well, which is great. So most games are gonna last anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes. And so that's pretty cool. You can play a lot of games in a row. And so this could be a great addition to either start off a game night or end a game night. Or if you want to get in a quick solo mode, you could do that too. I really like the artwork in the game. I thought it was really cool where each individual card has its own unique artwork to it and character style. So again, it's kind of like all the 9s tended to have a theme, all the 8s had a theme to it, the 5s, etc. So that was pretty cool. The company also has a couple different versions of the game with different art styles. They play the same, but that's kind of cool as well. Another bonus to this is that you could technically use this deck as a regular deck of cards if you like it as well. I also think the game just has a fun mechanic in general where you're trying to defeat these 12 different enemies, and each card type has its own unique abilities with it. I thought that was really fun. And since the games are so quick, it allows you to have a really high replay value with the game. I will say though that the game is incredibly difficult, near impossible in some cases. My girlfriend and I played a ton of different games back to back in a 2-player fashion, and we never really even got close to winning, even though we felt like we were doing the best strategy every single time. I also played the solo mode several different times and kind of felt the same way. I got a little closer to winning in that version, but it was still incredibly difficult, and you kind of almost had to get lucky if you wanted to beat the game. So I think the game itself is probably better suited to playing with like 3 or 4 players. Otherwise, it just is way too hard and you'll never really find yourself winning. Now, it's not necessarily in the rules, but I think if you are going to play maybe in solo mode or 2-player mode, just increase the hand size a bit and see if that helps make the game a little bit easier. I think the game itself is supposed to be challenging as it is, so that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it might be too challenging to the point where you might never ever win. So consider doing that if you want to make it a little bit easier. Like I said, that's not in the official rules, but from our experience playing, we found that that might make sense to do that. Overall though, I think the game is pretty fun to play. It was easy to learn and fast to play. And because of all the different modes in the game, it gives you several different options on how you want to play. But I think it's overall best suited for probably a 3 and 4 player game, unless you make some adjustments to the difficulty level, as it can be incredibly hard to beat. If you guys think this game looks cool and you want to pick up a copy, there'll be links in the description below where you can do so. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button as it really helps out the channel. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notifications to get the latest updates of new nerd videos we put out. And if you'd like to help us support the channel, pick out content and more, become a patron of ours at nerdproblemsgaming.com/Patreon. And if you'd like to plug into our live streams and Let's Plays we do on the channel, you can follow us on Twitch at nerdproblemsgaming.com/Twitch. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you more soon.